Hello, everyone, and welcome back to episode 3 of Mile High Mana. Had quite a week of magic that we wanted to discuss here. I'm joined by Lee Wilson, as per usual. Lee, how you doing today?
I'm great, man. How are you?
Doing all right. Doing all right. Before we hop into it, wanted to run through the quick agenda here. Lee had some more RC grinding stories to tell from over the weekend. We also wanted to discuss the modern regional championship results. I also want to put a pin in Breach and call it a day there. We have probably the last couple things to discuss regarding that deck before it's swiftly exited from the modern format. Then we want to talk about SCG Con Denver. So that's coming up here April 11th through 13th in Denver, Colorado. And then the bulk of today's episode is actually going to be sort of our bread and butter. We're going to talk about Legacy at a glance, talk about a little bit of the history of Legacy and our own individual paths of playing Legacy. And then there's going to be some Legacy at SCG Con Denver, so maybe you'll get some insights into what we're playing. Lee, any objections?
No, that sounds great.
All right. Well, I'll pass the conch over to you if you want to talk about some standard.
Yeah, thanks. I know you're probably tired of me talking about red decks and standard, but the season's almost over. I looked at the calendar and there was two events left to play before it rotates to modern, and I just kind of decided to play them both. I've been really enjoying the format and basically top eight at every RCQ that I've been to. Had a lot of close calls, and I was like, all right, so I'm going to play these last two. So I drive down. It wasn't short. I went to this store called Petrie's Family Game Store, a place I'd never been before. It's in Colorado Springs, and I show up about 10:30 to get started, and I walk right in the room, and I see Cora sitting there next to Matt Nass, Sam Pardee, and Carolyn Pardee, and I was like, all right, well, this is gonna be a tough crowd for sure, but I very skillfully got the round one bye, so that was great. Got to go walk around and see what everybody was playing. Matt was on basically his exact same Pro Tour deck, but he cut one rest in peace for an additional Beza or Beza, however you say that card. So, looking for me clearly. Carolyn was playing the Gruul deck that Yu Chen Lee had played, and Sam was playing a Convoke, a Jeskai Convoke deck, and then Cora of all people was playing that Calyx deck that we talked about that Casey beat me with the other day. So anyway, we had 23 players, I think. So I got the bye. Round two, honestly, can't remember. Won my round two. Round three got paired into Matt Nass playing Domain. And unfortunately, the games weren't that exciting. I mulliganed both games. He kept perfect sevens. Game one, if I recall, was double Surveil land into Temporal Lockdown turn 3, White Overlord on turn 4, and Zur on turn 5. Smash me for like however much damage that is. It was like a whole bunch. I think it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 7. I think it was 11 damage, 7 of it lifelink on turn, whatever turn that is. So that was a beating. And then I mulliganed on the second game, and he had double Ride's End into White Overlord and Zur again. The crazy thing about animating the White Overlord with Zur and the attackers is that it's literally lethal in 2 hits. So that deck like really turns the corner crazy fast. And I think I may be approaching that matchup slightly wrong. Like, there are cards in the Gruul deck and even in the mono red deck, if you play Questing Druid, that are kind of meant to go long and have like card advantage and stuff. But I don't think those are relevant. Like, I think that they turn the corner so fast and kill you so fast with huge chunks of lifelink that you basically just need to kill them as fast as possible. So anyway, kind of had some interesting thoughts coming out of that match with Matt, but it was nice to sit and chat with him. And then I pulled out my iPad and we were watching the regional championship from Charlotte on the iPad and stuff. And it was cool that we just got to chat for a while, and he, told some stories about playing the PT and stuff. So that was pretty fun.
Not many people can say that they went to their local RCQ and their round 3 opponent was the most recent Pro Tour champion. I think that's pretty cool.
I mean, he won the Pro Tour like 6 days before, like with the same deck and the same format. So I was like, yeah, I mean, it was awesome, and it was fun because Sam and Carolyn were sitting there too, and we were just, Sam kind of gives him a bunch of crap, and he says that he's lucky all the time and stuff. They have a great banter, the two of them back and forth. So that was fun just to be kind of a part of. And then I get paired into Carolyn round 4 in a Gruul mirror, like pretty close to the same 75, although I had Sentinel of the Nameless City in my deck and she didn't. And it actually ended up being quite good. I won game 1 on the draw on the back of 2 Sentinels, kind of just brick walled everything that was going on and ended up taking over the game because I used the maps that it generated to go on a Emberheart Challenger and draw a bunch more cards and basically kind of put the game out of reach. And then lost game 2 on the draw in pretty standard fashion and won game 3. Being on the play is obviously quite good there, but I felt pretty good about my play. So I beat Carolyn, and then I have to battle another mirror, Sarah, and won that as well. So I must have lost round 2 because I didn't have a great record. But anyway, I managed to end up 7th, make top 8. Paired into this really nice guy. He plays playing a white blue control deck, and he dispatches me pretty quick. His deck is just full of temporary lockdowns, Jay of Judgments, Bezas, and White Overlords. And apparently that's a tough matchup. So quick bow out and head home and make dinner and stuff. But it was a fun event, had a good time, and always a pleasure to play Matt and talk to Sam and Carolyn. So I no regrets. And there's one more on Saturday I'm going to play in. So, and I think I'm going to play the mono red deck for my final bout in standard.
Cool. Well, I think you're about due for one, to be honest. It's top 8 every single one, get second like 2 RCQs ago, and have to go through. Like, it reminds me of that scene from Rounders when Matt Damon walks down into the basement of like the gambling hall, and it's just a bunch of just absolute killers. Like you look left and you look right, and there's not a bad player in the room.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what it is, right? The guy that I had played in the quarterfinals and lost to, he and I talked a bunch. He had been playing since 2001 and was part of the Junior Super Series, way back 20 years ago and stuff. And, a really great player and whatever. And, when you make top 8 of these RCQs here in the region, like, there are no gimmies. Like, everyone's good, and you gotta rattle off 3 wins, right? So I wouldn't keep going to the RCQs if I didn't enjoy them. So I'm just going to keep going.
Yeah, I mean, money can't buy that experience that you're getting playing against a Mythic champion, Pro Tour champion, a bunch of people that have top 8'd Pro Tours, and a really great bridge into this is congratulations to Denver local Corey Burkhart on getting a Worlds invite through our podcast own Lee Wilson as well. So yeah. You want to highlight that too?
Yeah, we played in the top, I think it was the semifinals. I can't recall. It's been a long time now, but it was like the modern RCQs before MH3 had released. I think it was May, if I remember correctly. And we played at May Games right down from your house. And Corey beat me playing a blue-red Murktide deck, if my memory serves. Qualified for this round of RCs and then just like basically crushed the tournament all the way to the end. So yeah, congrats to Corey. I mean, he's a super awesome guy. I watched him play SCG coverage forever back in the day, and he's always just a super pleasant opponent and in good spirits. And, I was just stoked to see him do well. And same goes for Jesse Robkin. I know Jesse had been part of putting the Breach deck together, both in previous and in its current iteration. And both of them just played impeccably, I thought, with great camaraderie at the table. And I don't know. I just think that's what Magic should be, right? Like the people who were the best in the room bubbled to the top, playing the best deck, and battled it out in a mirror for the extra 10 grand or whatever. So even though I think a lot of the commentary around Modern is a little bit negative because it's so Breach centric, like it's going to get resolved here pretty quickly, I assume, on the 31st of March. And I don't think it ruined the tournament in any capacity, and I'm pretty sure that, the best players at the room who were the most prepared made it to the top.
Yeah, and also Jessie Robkin, too, worth noting. She had some pretty decent plot armor going into the event. I'm not sure if you caught any of that on coverage, but as I understand it, Jessie Robkin had retired from Magic a few years back and started working full-time with the professor in Tolarian Community College and getting really engrossed in the gathering piece of Magic, which is super cool. Always great to see like folks working with the professor and pushing the game further, making it more popular. I was actually in a store over the weekend wearing a Magic the Gathering hoodie, and the clerk was like, "Oh yeah, I play." And I was like, "Oh, what do you play?" And like, "Oh, Commander, blah 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 blah." So like, it's just becoming more and more mainstream as folks like Jesse Robkin keep assisting and pumping out content for million subscriber channels. And prior to the event, Jesse Robkin, I believe, told either Jim Davis or Corey Baumeister, the two commentators for the vast majority of the event, that she was retiring and this was like her last event. And I don't think this will be her last event now that she's qualified for Worlds and probably, a couple Pro Tours too. I actually am not familiar with how it worked completely. It might just be one Pro Tour and then one Worlds invite. Do you have any clarity there?
They get RCs for the next one, Pro Tour and Worlds, yeah. But I don't know. I'm thinking now I should retire and then come back or something. That's a money move.
Yeah, build out the plot armor and then you'll end up in a PT and a World Championship. But jokes aside, Jessie definitely played incredibly tight Magic all weekend. Every time she was on stream, it was fun to watch, and I thought she did a great job of managing the mirror, which is, for me, playing Breach as long as I did, that was really the only spooky matchup. The one that was like unclear and sometimes like the plan felt a little, outside of just trying to turbo out the combo. When you don't have it, what do you do? And how do you stay comfortable in those situations? And I thought that she demonstrated that capacity in spades.
She was totally ready to play the control and be super patient and make her land drops and react to her opponent, and that just shows that she just put a bunch of time in. I'm pretty sure she also 5-0'd her LCQ on Friday to like qualify to get in the event, so it's like an amazing tear, like I love those stories.
Yeah, that's basically 22-1 on the weekend to get a Worlds invite from not even having an RC invite to start the weekend. I mean, I think that's all in a good day's work, in my opinion.
I watched the coverage kind of off and on both days. Like, anything that you saw that kind of stuck out to you, really, besides obviously the best deck is the best deck?
Yeah, I mean, the most obvious highlight is, of the 32 top decks of all the players that got a PT invite from this event, half of them were on Breach. So 16 on Breach, and the other 16 were on some combination of Boros Energy, Amulet Titan, Eldrazi. Mill was also represented. 3 Mill decks were in the top 32, which I think is super interesting. And then Young Dingo playing Ruby Storm, which is obviously a pet deck that I discussed on the last episode. It's very clear to me that, Breach was what to be doing, in this event. And I do think you're right. It's going to be gone in the next couple weeks. It was a little boring at times watching the stream, and they did a great job of not showing Breach mirrors over and over again, but once you hit top 8, it was pretty much unavoidable. And a few win-and-ends, too. They had to show a couple Breach mirror win-and-ends. So can't really blame them there. They did their best to keep it super entertaining. And, like, the Breach mirror can be really interesting, especially if it's not, like, a blowout one way or another and folks literally just have to do what the deck's called and sort of grind away. I think those games are really fun, but obviously the deck can just go the full mile on turn 2, and there's not much your opponent can do about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a combo mirror, right? But like, there are some controlling elements, and you do have the angle of like the creatures and drawing cards and leveraging Emery and leveraging Tamiyo. Like, there is a bunch of nuance to the deck. It's not like honestly, if this metagame would have been 50% Amulet Titan, I think it's even more egregious to watch personally. So I'm not like mad at that. I also wanted to call out the Hollow One deck in 18th. I thought was really well constructed. I've played Hollow One off and on since its inception at the Pro Tour, like a long time ago, and I played a little bit after the MH3 release with Detectives Phoenix. But I think Marauding Mako or Mako. Yeah. I think it's Mako technically, although I thought it was Mako too, but I believe it is Mako. At least that's what somebody was claiming. But I think just main decking for Dauthi Voidwalkers was just a great call in this metagame. And then between the Voidwalkers and the Leyline of the Void, I think you have the graveyard angle like pretty well covered. So I mean, going 11-3-1 in this field of 1,300 players is like no joke. So that may be a deck that I look at after the bannings and see if it like still has any legs to it, because that deck is like really fun to play.
Well, if you make a commitment to that, I'll dig out my retro signed Hollow Ones, and you can use them for the modern RCQ season, because I only play them when they're paired with Bazaar Baghdad.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I'm not much of a vintage gamer, but that does sound sweet.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, I think I'm pretty much tapped out on talking about Modern between last episode and this episode. There's obviously some great highlights amongst players that we care about from the Denver local scene, and a couple great stories here. But for the most part, I thought that this event was pretty predictable. Not necessarily uninteresting, but definitely predictable. And I'm looking forward to Modern RCQ season because I'll basically probably be able to play quite a bit of the season. I am getting married in August, so when the season ends in like June, that'll be right around the time where I need to buckle down, and I have other weddings to go to, and my whole life is going to be super, super busy around non-Magic activities. So I want to take this one seriously, see if I can get a qualification, and then reap the rewards of that later.
Yeah, I think I've said it more than once on this podcast already, but I've always struggled in Modern comparatively to other formats, but I'm going to do the same. Like, I just think playing the RCQ scene around here is too fun not to participate, but hopefully we can figure out if there's a best deck, how to play that. I to me, it's unclear after they ban Breach, like what's the best deck is. Like, the Ketramos decks seem pretty good, and I assume the Energy decks are still pretty good, but I don't know. It'll be kind of fun to watch it unfold.
Agreed. I'm doing my best not to sleeve up elves, just because that's what I do at the beginning of every Modern shakeup. But I'm going to stay true to my guns and stick with the two decks that I've been sort of tooling away with, being Ruby Storm and Affinity now. I actually went undefeated at a local recently with Affinity, and a lot of my games didn't even feel close. So that deck seems very powerful. But enough about Modern. Let's go ahead and talk about another big event that's coming up, specifically for Denver and other folks who are traveling in. But we're actually getting an SCG Con, which I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, might be one of the largest events hosted in Denver since Grand Prix Denver in like 2018 or 2019. That was before I moved here.
Well, I think they had a regional championship here last year. But otherwise,
they?
yeah, probably is, yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Definitely overlooked that, so my apologies there. So the Denver main event will be sealed. Obviously, we're going to get a host of really great like side events and like sub-side events is what I call them, where they're like $50 to $100 entry, and they usually have a pretty decent sized prize. But the sealed main, I think it's like $150. Sealed, it's going to be similar structure to the Vegas sealed main that they do at the World Championships the past couple years. Do you have any plans on playing this? Because I believe it's going to be Dragonstorm the week of release of Dragonstorm.
Yeah, my plan is to latch on to Daniel Cooperman and have him tell me what's good and then try to do well. I am not the greatest limited player in the world, but I had played one of these at Vegas the year before last for Wilds of Eldraine, and I got all the way to the win-in round and was at least competitive. So, yeah, I'm going to give it a run. Zero expectations, but, if they're going to bring a huge event into town to play, like, I'm in. And then, if it goes well or doesn't, great. And if there's some side events to play on Sunday, then I think that's where I'll be.
Cool. Yeah, and Daniel, I'm pretty excited for Daniel. I mean, he is just an absolutely like awesome limited player and has been super helpful to my own personal limited growth. And I would go as far to say is like that's his specialty as a player. And for those that don't know, Daniel is our third at pretty much every team event that myself and Lee do. Daniel's just been a fantastic addition to our team and a fantastic support source for the both of us when it comes to both life and Magic. So maybe we'll have to have him on here at some point soon. And, hopefully he'll just kick ass at the Denver sealed main, and then we can just have him come talk about his experience.
Yeah, I think either the week before or the week after the event, we got to have him on here and pick his brain about the limited format.
Yeah, I actually haven't even asked. I imagine he's going to play. I can't think of any reason why he wouldn't, other than, prior obligations. But, I think that of the three of us, he's definitely got the best chance of, making lemonade out of lemons if he has a good batter in between pull.
Yeah, well, don't worry. We're going to have to beat, Matt Nass and Sam Pardee and all the they were talking about going. They're like all excited because they're like crushing limited events. I was like, oh yeah, great. Let's see how this goes.
The best players in the world just seems like they love limited. That's their primary format. And like LSV is a great example of that too, where the majority of his content, even though he's got like 12 to 15 top eights under his Pro Tour top eights under his belt, seems like if he had it his way, every event he ever played in would be limited.
Well, I mean, the guys that get to the top of the Pro Tour have to be that way if you think about it, right? Like the Pro Tour constructed formats rotate between 2, 3, 4 different types of formats, but they have to play limited every time, right? So, I mean, these guys are are locked in to at least 4 times a year of playing the highest stakes limited that exists. And I think if you do that and you get into it, it's pretty fun. And then you can cram on it, get exactly as much as you can extracted out of it, and then it's done and you move on, right? And I think there is actually something really nice about that.
Definitely, definitely. And that's actually a great point that I really didn't put together is you sort of have to be limited obsessed if you have any plans of being incredibly successful at the Pro Tour level. It's not an avoidable part of your game.
Well, yeah, especially when you get to these formats. Like the last PT format's a perfect example where for that particular weekend, it looked like Domain was kind of the best deck, but pretty much it was like pretty equal in a three-way kind of roundabout. This beats this rock, paper, scissors sort of standard, which is where standard formats that are good typically end up with some like a rock, paper, scissors top 3 decks. And so you can't expect to go better than 60%, maybe 70% win rate in constructed with a format that's basically solved. So the way that these guys qualify for the next PT, just like Andrea Mengucci did this last PT, was they go 6-0 unlimited. And if you do that and have a decent constructed record, then you're good to go, right? So a lot of the guys who I know who have been part of either the Channel Fireball team or any of the other major testing teams say that they spend at least 80% of their Pro Tour preparation time on limited. And I think it shows.
Wow, that's a pretty insane stat. I didn't really know that. That's not where my first thoughts would have gone towards prepping for PT, but there's a reason why I'm not at the PT level yet.
That's just where the biggest edges are to be gained. You know what I mean? Like there's just the biggest edge to gain there for match wins.
Sure. Outside of the sealed main, though, what are your other plans at SCG Denver in terms of side events or cards that you're looking at picking up or, anything like that? Because I got some signatures in the back of my mind that I want to get, but I'm curious what you're thinking.
I haven't looked. I assume that there's some side events to play. My focus is going to be on playing the main event. And then typically my second agenda is to ask you who the artists are so I know what cards to bring to get signed. After that, I'm, whatever, hanging out.
The big one for this one is going to be Rob Alexander. That's going to be one that since I finished all my dual lands, I need to get him to sign I think he did like 4. So I need him to finish off my play sets for those. The rest of them I think I'm pretty set on, but I always do a big brief where I make a big chart and list out all the cards I need from each artist and plan ahead. That way, I can get everything done in a reasonable amount of time instead of standing in line all damn day.
Yeah, for sure.
So no cards. You're all set on all of your retro frame fetch lands because I know that was your most recent acquirement project.
I have 2 Misty Rainforests and 1 Scalding Tarn remaining in my list. I've been kind of picking them up with store credit. I kind of made the decision not to just go on TCG Player and buy them, but to try to earn them. I top aided we played 2015 Modern. I don't know if you remember that, but Daniel was like, hey, let's go play 2015 Modern. So I whipped out a Tom Ross Infect deck and top aided that event. And then with the store credit, I bought my 3rd Scalding Tarn. So I'm almost done. There's a few retro fetches left, but that's going to be my 40 that I'm proud of.
That'll be dope. Yeah, I love that. I think I have a few non-blues left to get, but I don't have any vested interest in doing that right now. Your Shocklands, though, those are all Rob Alexander, or at least the ones that have the original Dissension art. So maybe that's a consideration for you to get all 40 of those signed or however many you got.
I'll have to look. I do have 4 of all the Shocklands, but I wasn't really playing that much in the original Ravnica, so all of mine are from the Return to Ravnica block.
Okay, those wouldn't be Rob Alexander then, I think. But you could get the Retro Shocks, which I did. I upgraded the Retro Shocks and then got them signed.
I actually don't like the Retro Shocks at all. To me, they don't look like Shocklands. They look like Fetchlands to me, and they are very confusing. So I do love retro borders of most cards, but I am not a Shockland fan.
Interesting. You don't like having to take a bunch of time searching through your library when you fetch because all your cards look the same?
No, I really don't.
Oh, I enjoy it. I'm a glutton for punishment. My cards look dope.
I mean, they are pretty. I'll give you that.
Self-boosting aside, too, I think we're going to have some plans. I'm going to try to put together an order for some Mile High Mana stickers. And then I also thought about this, too. I didn't even warn you of this ahead of time, but I'm also thinking about maybe getting some playmats made for the 2 of us for that event.
Oh man, I thought you were gonna tattoo your forehead or something. But yeah, okay, I'll take a playmat.
I could tattoo my forehead. Who knows? Anything for the pod. So, if you see us, holler at us. We might have a sticker for you. We might not. I'll probably give you an update closer towards the time. But I did find a place that will do some pretty cheap stickers that we can help sort of spread some awareness of what we're doing here.
Yeah, that'd be cool, and we can stick them on our deck boxes and stuff. I think that's a great idea.
Sweet. Awesome. So we covered your standard RCQ over the weekend. We covered modern, covered the Denver Sealed main event. Now we're going to step into the lion's share of this podcast, which is going to be Legacy. So just a quick reminder on what we're planning on covering. So Legacy at a glance, which just means Legacy today. We've talked about this a little bit in the last episode, but I don't think it hurts to take a couple minutes to hint at it again. The Legacy Showcase Challenge from over the weekend, featuring just a really sweet deck that I've played in some capacity before. I want to talk about our individual histories of playing Legacy. Lee has a much more storied history than I do, but I still have a few years under my belt and plenty of top 8 finishes to chat about. I also wanted to cover the history of Delver, which that one I sort of saved for last because I think we could ramble on and on and on and on about that one. Lee, when I talked to him the other day, just a general phone call to catch up about what we wanted to do for this episode, gave me a really cool story about Delver over the years, and I figured it would be great to share that with the team.
You want to start on the overview? Would you like me to?
You go ahead and start on Legacy as it currently stands. We don't necessarily have to make this a BNR conversation, but for those that listen to the most recent Eternal Glory podcast, which both Lee and I listen to, there's a few things covered there, and frankly, a little bit of contention amongst a couple of the hosts, not in a bad way, but just in a healthy banter sort of way. And I think we both have our own opinions regarding it. But yeah, Lee, if you want to go ahead and start.
Okay, so I think the format is primarily defined around Entomb, like we talked about before. I think it's just the most powerful card to be playing at 1 mana. Pretty surprising when you look at the results from the Showcase Challenge that there wasn't more Reanimator. I know that there was plenty in the tournament. I was kind of watching on Sunday, both Gabe Nassif and Sylvia Wataru were playing a blue-black Reanimator, and I believe both started the event 5-0 and then kind of got to the end and fell off with, I think, X3 records at the end or X4. But there was a lot of Reanimator at the top tables, and then it kind of got funneled out at the end. If I'm looking at the results here, there's only a couple that are showing up on the front page, so that's pretty impressive to me. The other Legacy event that I hadn't even thought about bringing up, but there was a Legacy event in Europe that Andrea Mengucci was playing in. I think it was called the European Unity Cup. And it ended up being Andrea on Blue-Black Reanimator and Mogged on Blue-Black Tempo in the finals of that event. So I think that those two decks kind of define the pillar of the format. And then everything else under there is typically some sort of a combo deck or a stompy deck. But what's surprising to me is that if you look at the Showcase Challenge here, that like Cradle Control made it to the top of the pile. Like, talk to me about this deck, because I basically talked you out of playing this deck at Eternal Weekend last year, and here it is kind of making it to the top. Like, what are your thoughts on this list?
Well, let's clarify here. I found out that Nadu is just better than this deck, and at least it was for that tournament. And I still pivoted off Nadu anyway. But in its essence, yeah, I ended up going with a Brainstorm Ponder deck over the Guy's Cradle deck. But so I guess a brief history on Cradle Control as it stands today, because I think most people don't think of Gaia's Cradle as like a control card, and so it's odd to see that in a mono green splashing black control sort of style list. So Cradle Control is basically a reaction in the meta that happened with the printing of Orcish Bowmasters, where your traditional combo elves, Glimpse of Nature elves, made a pivot, and it was already starting to pivot a little bit before Orcish Bowmasters with the inclusion of cards like Fiend Artisan, where you have a little bit more of a toolboxy approach to the game. And then the addition of cards like Endurance, printed in MH2, was also a really strong reason for the deck to be more toolboxy in a way that combats most of what it's going to see. And like Endurance is probably the best card in the deck against your Delver style decks. So when we saw like Is It Delver versus White Plume Adventurer meta, this deck was slamming for Endurance because It blocks Delver. It blocks DRC when it's all turned on, Delirious. It can block a Murktide in a pinch. It can also prevent the casting of Murktide. And ever since that evolution started snowballing, we've seen new cards get released that have further bolstered the plan into more of a controlling land style with a very strong natural order top end type of deck. And when I say land style, what I mean by that is the inclusion of cards like Elvish Reclaimer, the cards like Scythecat Cub, which I believe came out in Foundations, and White of the Reliquary. So Elvish Reclaimer, if you don't know, it's 1 green for a 1/2 elf. You can tap 2 and tap Elvish Reclaimer to sacrifice a land and play a land from your library tapped. So you can fetch out a Guy's Cradle or, Bajuka Bog at instant speed, or a Talon Gates of Madara, which is another card that has further bolstered this deck by being able to just phase out a creature at any point in the game. So Elvish Reclaimer is effectively a kill on sight card, especially for a deck like Delver, because if you let it sit there for too long, you can't kill it with a bolt, because it turns into a 3/4 when you have 3 or more lands in your discard. Scythecat Cub is a 1 and a green for 2/2. Let me double check if this thing has trample. But a 2/2
Yeah, it does.
cat. Okay, so it has natural trample no matter what. There's no condition to the trample. And whenever a land you control enters, put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. If this is the second time this ability has resolved this turn, double the number of counters on that creature instead. So you can get a Scythecat Cub up to pretty massive creature when you combine it with an effect like an Elvish Reclaimer or White of the Reliquary. White of the Reliquary is also another newer card, an MH3 card, where it is black-green for an effectively a reverse Knight of the Reliquary. So we're looking at a 2/2 with Vigilance, and then it gets 1/1, a +1/+1 for each creature in the graveyard. And then you can tap it and sacrifice another creature to search your library for a land card, put it into the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle the library. So this is just another way that you can help bolster, not only bolster your Scythecat Cub, but in addition to that, you can also help protect your lands and your creatures, like Dryad Arbor. You can also get your Talon Gates, your Bajuka Bog, similar to how you get your Elvish Reclaimer. So there's a lot of utility here that makes the deck, basically if you untap with an Elvish Reclaimer or the White of the Reliquary, removal is effectively dead against this deck, which is really unique for a creature-based control deck, where if you can blank removal by holding up one of these, then you're in really good shape, especially with your Scythecat Cub. When you go like fetch, trigger Scythecat Cub, put a counter on it, then spin something with Reclaimer, trigger, put a counter on the Scythecat Cub, and then double your counters. And then you can do a White of the Reliquary. You can turn it into like a 10/10 super, super fast. And that's a 10/10 trampler. Now, once you're done sitting here force of willing and trying to make sure your opponent doesn't untap with an Elvish Reclaimer or White of the Reliquary, and you've spent all your resources, then they're going to be slamming in natural order and going to get an Atraxa. And it's all pretty elementary. I mean, we've seen this happen with a close friend of the channel, Nick Ragazzo. He's one of our locals who's been effectively our pioneer of these sort of strategies. He's Guy's Cradle gamer for the better part of a decade, and I always look to him whenever I'm trying to pick up a deck like this for help and for thoughts and for tech. So I'm gonna take a breath. I just basically spilled out as much as I know about Cradle control at a high level. Yeah, I'll throw it back to you, Lee.
I can't believe we had all that beautiful explanation and not one mention of Legacy staple Lair of the Hydra.
Oh, God. Well, you know how I feel about Lair of the Hydra. I played that card in Pioneer, Modern, and Legacy at one point.
I mean, that card is surprisingly good in this deck. This list did remind me a bunch of Nick because it has 4 Thoughtseize and 4 Snuff out in the board, which sounds exactly like he builds his deck. So, this deck is, I think, difficult for me. Whenever I play into this deck, it always feels difficult. I think it typically just has good blue matchups in general. And we saw that play out in the top 8 here. I think he got matched up into a bunch of blue decks, beat all of them. You just kind of grind them out. So, I think that he kind of ended up on a weekend where this was pretty well positioned and made his way through like the chaff of the early rounds and then got paired into a bunch of the top decks. And if you can start the event 4-0 as Cradle control and then play a bunch of like good blue pilots at the end, I think you're in a good spot. But it's always the first 3 or 4 rounds of the Legacy events that makes me worried about playing this deck specifically.
I also think that this deck has a really strong matchup against not only blue decks, but the decks that are at the top of the meta. This has a great Oops All Spells matchup, has a great Cephalid Breakfast with Nadu matchup, and it has a great Reanimator matchup because we're featuring 4 copies of Endurance and then 8 creatures that can instant speed Bajuka Bog a player. So, and then if you want to include the 4 green Sun Zenith and 4 Once Upon a Time and 3 Natural Order as additional copies of Endurance or these creatures that can produce this graveyard bombing effect, we're in really good shape here. And then I would hate to be the combo deck that dies to an Endurance in game 1, and then after sideboarding, I got to worry about 4 Thoughtseize, 2 Fairy Macabre, 2 Force of Vigor, and Legacy Staple Insidious Fungus.
Yeah, Insidious Fungus. I have to read this one every time. A 1 green for a 1/2. Then you can play 2 to sack it, destroy target artifact, destroy target enchantment, or draw a card and put a land from your hand into the battlefield tapped. So, I mean, I guess this card is a pretty good disenchant that you can green Sun Zenith for, huh?
Yeah. The deck is doing all the right things. What it struggles against most, I would assume, to be some combination of the Eldrazi decks. And I say combination because we also had a Cloud Post deck featured in top 8. Max Garman told me that this player that made top 8 is like one of the pioneers, not pioneers, but one of the innovators in the Cloud Post Discord.
Yeah. True Futurism is like the guy. He's like the Cloud Post guy, so for sure. And explain to me, I asked you this earlier off air, but like, I don't understand the one of Urza's Saga in the sideboard. Like, why and what matchups is this for?
Well, I mean, the first thing that you got to remember is that we've talked about all these ways that the deck can fetch out a land. And then additionally from there, you can get the Saga. You can make constructs if you want to. That's not like an uncomfortable plan for the deck at all. But additionally, what you can do is you can bring it out with like an Elvish Reclaimer or something of that effect, and then from there it'll go and grab your Pithing Needle, which I think there's a lot of equity that you gain from having a one of Pithing Needle in the sideboard that you can additionally fetch out. It just adds that one extra layer of friction for your opponent to play through when you're already sort of slowly taxing them down by presenting these really unanswerable threats that also interact at instant speed. And they're all in the form of a creature too, which is great because creatures are clocks. That's really where this deck makes its money. And it is a working man's deck. I'll tell you what, you're not going to be winning games on like turn 3 or 4, but you can definitely have a game pretty well decided by that, that turn 3 or turn 4.
Yeah, cool. I saw they ran Atraxa. I know you've traditionally liked Craterhoof Behemoth, but I assume that both of those cards typically win the game.
In this list, I actually think I like Atraxa more. Reason being is because this isn't really like a turbo sort of Craterhoofy type of deck. It's effectively it's a control deck. I mean, we're really only playing 12, 13 one-drop creatures, which is an extraordinarily low amount of one drops to be playing Craterhoof. Like you probably want about 20-ish, 20 plus one drops for Craterhoof, or something like a Spring Heart Nantuko that can just make infinite dudes, and then you slam a Cradle and make 9 mana, and it doesn't matter that you don't even have to natural order for that Craterhoof.
Yeah, okay. Any other thoughts on Cradle before I run down the rest of the decks here in the top 8?
No, go ahead.
Cool. Second place, Tundaslav on Orzhov Taxes. This is basically a port of the modern Black-White Blink deck, but it's a Yorion deck, and they've added an entire Stoneforge Mystic package. To me, the most interesting card to Stoneforge now is one called Phantom Blade, which is 4 and a black equipment. When it enters the battlefield, attach it to target creature you control and destroy up to one other target creature. So it's kind of a fetchable removal spell. It also gives +1/+1 in Menace, but I don't. That's probably not super relevant. But it kind of just gives the Stoneforge deck a way to like go get a kill spell if they don't have one. So I think that's pretty sweet. Otherwise, it's still the same Solitude, Philia, Overlord of the Baelmerk stuff that you're used to. Like this combination of cards is like just super powerful and super good. So I expect to see it going through modern and legacy here with no stopping it, honestly, but otherwise pretty kind of standard stuff. Third place, Sneak and Show, super solid list, but it plays 4 stock up. So I think that's something we're going to see out of these Ancient Tomb blue decks in Legacy. Is stock up is just an extremely powerful card. Otherwise, it's just quad laser, show and tell stuff that you'd expect. Sneak attack, 1 omniscience. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I always have liked Sneak and Show. Sneak and Show has been like a staple of Legacy since before I started playing, and I've always found it to be like pretty fun to play against because they have all the counter spells and cantrips and stuff. So it's not just like a, to me, it's totally different animal than some like Oops All Spells that is specifically trying not to interact. What else here? So okay, then we get to 2 interesting decks. I think the fair blue decks in the top 8. In 4th place, there's an Esper Tempo deck that's basically a Kaito Bane of Nightmares and Tameo deck. I don't know. I mean, I'm honestly surprised this deck made it that far. I played 1 Kaito in my blue black tempo deck, but when Psychic Frog was legal last year, I think 3 is just a ludicrous number of that card to play. I don't know if you had any thoughts on this list in particular.
My thoughts are, well, a couple of things, I guess. This is one of those brainwormy activities that we tried to make work before Eternal Weekend last year, but again, we also had one of the most powerful Dimir creatures of all time, and this deck doesn't have access to that. So what I think is going on here is this player is trying to be less of a Tameo deck and more of a Kaito deck. So what I mean by that, I guess, is playing Tameo on turn 1, turn 2, attack, make a clue, hold up Bowmasters, slam Strix, or, hold up a 2-mana play with interaction or whatever that might be. And then turn 3, attack with Tameo, make a clue, and then pick it up and put in a Kaito. Like, that's the play pattern that I think that this player really, really wanted to hone in on, and it looked like it worked for them. So, you make 2 clues along the way. You're slamming a Kaito, which is a hexproof creature on your turn. It also stuns down any immediate threats, and it draws cards. It's just a really good card overall, and it sees play in so many formats at this point.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I might have to try this deck just to give it a shake, but this just seems so dirtily to me, and the mana seems rough. But they ended up 8-3 total in the event, so had a pretty good run. I like the 2 Nihil spell bombs in the main, even if they don't have something like Goyf that they're trying to grow. Like, that's just a nice way to cycle and cantrip and play into the Reanimator meta. So this deck just looks like Esper binder cards I like, but fair enough.
Sure, I believe that. You're excited about the next one.
Yeah, the next deck I really like, though, actually. So Azorius Tempo by Nils Fit. This is basically like quad laser blue-white, right? So it's 4 Tameo and 4 Murktide as the only threats. They're playing 20 lands, including 4 Wastelands, 4 Tundras, and a Mystic Sanctuary and an Archive. And a Caracas. So, like, just a super solid mana base. Surprising that there's no basic planes in this deck with trying to cast Wrath of the Skies post board, but I guess you're a Mystic Sanctuary deck, so you're trying to have all islands in play. And then 32 spells, including 2 stock up, 2 force negation, 3 spell pierce. So let's see, and all 8 removal spells, 4 Swords to Plowshares, 4 prismatic endings. So this person is just trying to say no to everything that you do and then play a giant Murktide. Like, I don't know. I kind of like it. Like, I have never actually played just straight blue-white. Typically, there hasn't been a reason to. I mean, way back in the day, we played some Stoneblade decks, but to me, this is a fundamentally different deck than that, trying to Murktide people and kill them. So you were posting earlier in the Discord that we're going to try to play Wednesday Legacy this week, and I may bring something like this to the table. This looks really fun to me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's a couple things that I would change about it just looking at it, and I'm not saying that I'm right and this player's wrong. Obviously, they got 5th place in a showcase challenge, so good on them. I think for me, want to cut the 1 Preordain and go to a 3rd stock up, especially since we're committing to Mystic Sanctuary in the mana base, because I think Mystic Sanctuary grabbing stock up is the absolute ceiling of the card. Otherwise, you're just basically setting up your draw step with, you're not getting any value with anything else other than stock up, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And it brings me back to the days of old where you'd play Mystic Sanctuary and 4 Expressive Iteration. And then I think that made a lot of sense because we're playing 4 copies of the card that we want to stack. instead of 2. So I sort of lean towards cutting the Preordain for an additional stock up, and then I'm probably cutting 1 Prismatic Ending for a Brazen Borrower, because I think that card's just absolutely ludicrously good, and it's a super good utility card. Plus, it's also a 5th clock, because this deck just looks like all it does is tango with your opponent for the first 8 turns of the game, and then Windmill Slam an 8/8 dragon. And if like you run out of dragons against like a Beanstalk deck, you're in deep shit. But a 5th threat doesn't hurt.
Yeah, I could get on with that. I mean, having a Brazen Borrower in your deck is like never a bad idea, and I would assume the only real downside is it's a little tiny bit more difficult to flip Tameo if you cut the Preordain, but I don't know. I think all of that's reasonable. I kind of like just the fact that you can play basically the best removal and interaction in the format, right? So the best interaction in the format is clearly, in my mind, Force of Will and Wasteland are the 2 best ways to interact with your opponent. And then for removal, Swords to Plowshares has always been the best. So you're just like playing the best possible interaction, and then you get to post board, move over and play Wrath of the Skies, which is a pretty messed up Magic card against people that are trying to play to the board. So yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna give this a spin, and I guess next week I'll let you know how it goes here.
Yeah, I'm looking at this too. It looks like some fun. I'm not gonna sleeve it up for Wednesday if you are, but I definitely have some signed Containment Priest I just got in Chicago that are burning a hole in the binder.
Yeah, nice. Rest of the top 8, Red Stompy looks pretty stock to me. They're playing Trinisphere, 3 Trinisphere, which I haven't seen as much of, and a Cursed Mirror. Cursed Mirror is just a good card. For those of you who don't play a lot of Legacy, Cursed Mirror is an artifact, 2 and a red. You can tap it to make red, but as it enters the battlefield, you can have it become a copy of any creature on the battlefield with haste. So it's kind of like a 5th Broadside Bombardiers and a 5th Fury in this deck, and you can't really go wrong there.
Yeah, agreed. I'm looking at this, the next one on the list too, which was True Futurism's Cloud Post list. What you know about Trench Post, Lee?
I just had to hover over it to read it. No, I had no idea.
I'd give you $5 if you could tell me what it does without looking.
Nope, tell the listeners.
So Trench Post is a land-locus. Tap, add a colorless, 3 and tap. Target player mills a card for each locus you control. I read this card, and what this card says to me is that it's a 13th post. And that's about it, because we have 4 Planar Nexus, 4 Cloud Post. Oh wait, actually, Futurism's only playing 2 Glimmer Posts. It's interesting. I wonder why we're playing a Trench Post over a 3rd or a 4th Glimmer Post.
That's a question for Max. We'll ask Max Garman. Yeah.
And then, what do you think about 3 Karn Silex in the main?
I was just reading this card. I think what it is just a really bad version of Vexing Bauble, because it shuts off Force of Will. So I had to read this card, so let me read it out for everybody who's listening. Karn Silex, 3 mana, legendary artifact, enters the battlefield tapped. First line of text, players can't pay life to cast spells or to activate abilities that aren't mana abilities. So obviously you can't Force of Will. You also can't fetch. Is that right?
No, you can't.
Oh, okay. So that's pretty cool. And then its final actual line of text, X, tap, and exile the Silex. Destroy each non-land permanent with mana value X or less. So that's a pretty sweet effect, actually. You can wipe the board of a bunch of stuff. I don't know. This card seems pretty sweet to me.
Well, Lee, I think we missed the biggest card that this prevents from being cast.
Tell me.
What do you pay life to cast? The deck is named after the card.
Yeah. It probably shuts off. Does it shut off Doomsday? Is that part of the cast? I don't think it is.
Sure is.
That's part of the resolution.
Oh, okay, I see. Okay, no, you're right. It might be part of the resolution then.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's the last line of text is like half your life rounded down or whatever.
Got it. Okay, Interesting. So you could still cast like an Ad Nauseam through this too.
Yes, if that card was playable, you could cast it. Correct.
Watch yourself, Lee. The card's always playable.
If you say so.
I'm technically legally allowed to cast it, I guess is what I mean.
Yeah, fair enough. And then, Yield, Stock Delver in 8th. Good for them.
Oh wait, we forgot one other card in the Cloud Post deck I think you're gonna love. Can you tell me what Boom Pile does without looking?
Yeah, God. So I think it's a 4-man. Is that the one that like flips a coin and then destroys everything?
Hell yeah, it is. What do you think about that?
I mean, it doesn't seem great to me. Like, I almost wonder if this is even better than like Nevernull's Disc, which is a card from my childhood. But yeah, I'm not sure. That seems expensive and sketchy to me.
Your two favorite things.
Yeah.
Cool. Oh, you wanted to talk about Delver?
No,
I guess it's a good bridge into the next topic, but yeah,
I mean, this is like literal stock Delver in every capacity. Like they played 19 lands, 9 fetch lands. I would have played a Surveil land instead, but this is like literally the Delver deck that I had sleeved up minus the Druids. He played 2 Druids, but I don't know.
I hate that card.
Delver's
After
fine.
My run at the Legacy Cup, I don't think I'll play that card over Tamiyo and a cleaner mana base and cards like Magus of the Moon in my sideboard.
Yeah. I will say, though, like, as much as Blue-Black Reanimator has been dominating the challenges for the last month and a half, this particular metagame does look quite good and healthy to me and pretty diverse. So I don't know. This is the healthiest looking Legacy that I've seen since the ban, honestly.
Yeah. We'll see. We'll see what they end up doing. It's showcases like this that have me a little bit concerned that they're going to not do what they were planning on doing because there was a corrected event. You know what I'm saying? Like when what's predicted doesn't actually happen and we get cool things like Cradle Control and Cloud Post and weird Azorius Tempo lists popping out of the fold and doing well.
I wanted to highlight one more deck here because I think this was kind of close to being near the top, and I think he had a rough run out. So Stefan Schutz is somebody who I think is very clearly one of the best Legacy players in the world. Mental Misstep on MTGO. I believe he was 6-0 to start this challenge, ended up 6-3. And he played a blue painter deck that looks really sweet to him. We may have to have Eddie on here to do a painter special or something, but this blue painter deck has 4 stock ups, 4 One Rings, and 4 sink into stupors in the main deck. And this deck just looks pretty sweet to me. This is kind of like doing the busted artifact affinity sort of a thing with Mox Opals and Lotus Petals and Urza Sagas and stuff, and then just like kills you out of nowhere with Painter Servant and Grindstone. Like, I don't know. Like, I think blue painter was always kind of a joke because in the past you were like, why would I play that when I could play Fable the Mirror Breaker and a bunch of Pyroblasts? But now that you have stock up, I don't know. This might be the best painter deck in the room. What do you think about this deck?
Looking at it now, and like the biggest thing for me is like if Mana Drain got unbanned, this deck would go absolutely ludicrous.
Wow, that would be fun, wouldn't it?
You say that for now. We'll see. But I do like it. I mean, the funny thing is, though, is like the best painter deck I've always considered to be like a really good entry point into Legacy because it's, 1, more cost effective. It's not cheap, but it is more cost effective. 2, it's a great deck to like learn really every layer of the game with because Painter can play really well at every layer of the game. And then 3, it's a deck that like is pretty everlasting. I mean, we've had Painter's Servant or some version of Painter's Servant since like the inclusion of Legacy. So when we add cards like 4 Grim Monolith and 4 the One Ring, and instead of 1 Mox Opal, this deck's playing 3. Like, the deck has definitely gotten a lot more expensive, especially if this is determined to be sort of the best of breed painter deck. But I do like it. I mean, I like blue. I like the fact that this deck's actually playing 4 Sink into Stupor. So, like, that's really cool to me, and that's a card that I think this deck can take pretty massive advantage of. Yeah, and 2 Soul Guide Lanterns, so we want to see more copies of that card just to beat the Reanimator decks, and then it's got a lot of game in the sideboard. 4 Force Negation. It's kind of like 8 Cast and Painter had a baby, is what this is looking like to me.
Yeah, I agree. Like, to me, this looks like it could be a difficult matchup for the fair blue decks, especially if you're like going against Demir or something where you don't have you don't have Meltdown, you don't have Wrath of the Skies. Like this deck would just go way wider than you, and it would be really hard to manage. And then in the combo matchups, it gets to board into 4 Force of Wills and 4 Force of Negations, right? So you have 8 forces. But I don't know. I think this is pretty sweet. I'd be interested to see if anybody locally is playing. We typically have a lot of painter players locally, of all different kind of flavors. So I'm curious if anybody's going to show up with this, because anything that Stefan plays, like I always keep my eye on, because he really typically has his finger on Legacy, and he's just an absolute killer. So
for sure. Cool. Well, I think that's a good wrap up for the Legacy Showcase Challenge. We got really 2 things left on the radar. How much time do we got here? We're right at almost at the hour mark, but I think we can still squeeze some of this stuff in if you still got the gas in the tank, Lee.
Yeah, why don't we do like our personal histories and stuff that we've played, and like I think we can keep the history of Delver stuff like maybe to a different episode. That's like a pretty substantial topic. It's probably 10 years or 12 years of stuff to cover.
Okay. Well, we can punt that over to episode 4. So yeah, do you want to go ahead and start about, your own personal history of Legacy and why it's your favorite format and, how it's helped you grow as a Magic player?
Yeah, sure. So my buddy Nick and I decided to get into Legacy together. When we first started, it was right after Return to Ravnica had released. So I think that was 2012. And we kind of just looked at the Legacy metagame at the time and like picked decks that we thought we liked, right? We didn't have any format knowledge. We didn't really know what we were doing. So he had decided to play Shardless Bug at the time, which was a Deathrite Shaman, Ancestral Vision, Shardless Agent deck, kind of the Jund of Legacy, if you will. And I really like the look of the traditional Rug Delver decks with 4 Stifles and Spell Pierces and Spell Snares, like a real mana denial deck playing Nimble Mongoose and Tarmogoyf. So anyway, we took the plunge, we ordered all the dual lands and all the Force of Wills and all the expensive cards, and we got all excited, and we both got on the airplane and flew to Columbus, Ohio. And I remember Grand Prix Columbus 2012, I showed up with my 4 Stifle Nimble Mongoose deck, and the first 3 of 4 rounds I played against turn 1 Underground Sea Deathrite Shaman, and I got absolutely destroyed in that tournament. And that was a real eye-opener for me, trying to play mana denial strategy when everybody basically had Deathrite Shaman on turn 1 in the format. So that was a tough way to get started, but took my lumps. Immediately pivoted from there. I think I actually went on TCG Player at the time and bought Underground Seas and Deathrite Shamans like before I had even left the tournament hall in Columbus. So
how much was an Underground Sea back then?
Oh gosh, I would have to look. I would guess probably like 200 or 250 probably. Nice. So yeah, I think today I don't know what they are, but it must be expensive. Anyway, so then I immediately pivoted into playing Grixis Delver, and I played all of the different variations of Grixis Delver basically forever until it got banned. At the time, we were still allowed to play with Gitaxian Probe and Cabal Therapy, so that was just really messed up. Like there was a bunch of games where you would start with turn 1 Deathrite Shaman, and then turn 2 you could play Young Pyromancer, cast Cabal Therapy, hit or not, sack the token, cast Cabal Therapy again, and just like totally destroy their hand. And it was just, a ridiculous way to play Magic, actually. I personally think of all Magic cards that have ever existed, that Gitaxian Probe is the worst designed Magic card of all time. Trust me, I've cast it a lot, and it's just a miserable play experience. So God, you've never really played with Deathrite Shaman, have you? You kind of came after that?
Yeah, I started my Legacy experience was post MH2. So I joined in when like Ragavan and all that nonsense was going on.
Wow, Ragavan. Ragavan was really fun to play with. I don't know if you ever played any of the Delver decks with Ragavan in them. I think you were storming or cradle controlling or something during that time, but when we got to play Ragavan for, I don't remember how long it was. It was maybe 3 months or... Was it really?
It was like a
God,
year, I think. I remember
God, no wonder.
I won a $50 bet because my buddy Jose was so sure they weren't going to ban Ragavan, and he had just spent like $500 on a borderless foil playset or something like that. And I was like, dude, you just wasted your money. You want to put 50 on it? And he's like, yeah. And the day that it got banned, he just randomly showed up at my house, handed me $50, didn't say a word, and left.
That's too funny. That year that Ragavan was legal in Legacy was the first year that I was in Denver, and I remember just showing up and crushing people at F&Ms and stuff for Legacy. Like that deck was ludicrous. Like anytime that you got to turn one Ragavan with Daze and Wasteland on the play, it just felt like your opponent literally had no chance to play Magic. So, and I think the fun part of Ragavan is you could build it a bunch of different ways. Like I think originally we had built just blue red decks, and then the people at the top, it was kind of, you ended up playing a bunch of Ragavan mirrors. And I think my final iteration of the deck was a Jeskai deck with Swords to Plowshares and Urza's Saga in it. Like you got such a mana advantage from Ragavan in the low to the ground tempo decks that you could afford to play Urza's Saga and also make constructs because you just had so much mana on the table. Like it was quite a time.
I think it created a general heuristic that if a one mana creature is replacing Delver of Secrets, it probably should be banned.
I don't know. I kind of hope that at the end of March they just unban all of them and we'll see what happens. But that's probably not going to happen.
You just want to see the rapture.
Well, it just it depends, right? I've played I have a whole in my like fancy binder with all my expensive Legacy cards in them. I have a whole page of like stuff that's been banned. You look at it's like Uro and Oko and Ren and Six and Dreadhorde Arcanist and Ragavans and like all this kind of stuff. And I think of all of those cards, the one that felt the most egregious to me was Ren and Six. Just recurring Wasteland every turn was just totally ridiculous. I had my best ever Legacy results in a Grand Prix, and they let me play both Ren and Six and Oko in my deck at GP Atlanta, whatever year that was, 2018 or whatever. And I still recall to this day, I was X-1 on day one, and then I had a pretty good record on day two, and I got paired into Cyrus Corman Gill on the backup feature match in like round, I don't know, pretty late, 13 or 14 or something. And Cyrus was playing Ad Nauseam Tendrils at the time and just completely destroyed me on the backup feature. I think our match was over in like 12 or 15 minutes. He just totally crushed me. My Delver deck was basically set up to win the Delver Mirror because I think Ren and Six Delver was the quote unquote best deck for the tournament. So I had set my deck up to play super fair and just got totally run over by Ad Nauseam Tendril. And then Cyrus went on to win the tournament that particular day. So I think of all the Delver decks that I played, through my history, the Ren and Six Oko one felt like the most busted. And I do not wish for either of those cards to ever get unbanned.
Did you also get Treasure Cruise in that event?
No, that was before then, I think. If my memory serves, there was a whole point in time where the Treasure Cruise Delver stuff, that was Cons of Tarkir, right? Where that stuff came out. I think that was 2016 or 17. That was before MH1.
Got it. So I assume it was banned by then.
Yeah, no, it got banned like pretty fast. I don't think Treasure Cruise was there for very long. And then there was kind of an interesting period of time where they banned Treasure Cruise, but they left Dig Through Time legal, which like also became its own kind of mess of a format because the Omnitel deck at the time was just egregious, and Dig Through Time was just not nearly as good of a card in Delver as Treasure Cruise was. So I don't know. I thought that that gameplay to me, I did not like the Treasure Cruise gameplay for the same reason. I also did not really like the expressive iteration Delver format because it just feels hyper repetitive, right? You just play quad laser, 4 of everything, and all I do is draw more cards all the time. To me, it's way more interesting when you have some sort of an overpowered like threat that puts like some unique angle on the gameplay, whether it's, Deathrat Shaman interacting with the graveyard, or Dreadhorde Arcanist kind of flashing spells back. Like, to me, that's way more interesting than simply the Delver deck, beating you down and then drawing 6 more cards that game. Like, those type of Delver decks just end up feeling super repetitive and boring to me.
I feel like those decks also end up creating some of the best mirrors, though. Some of the best Magic that can be played is when two players are basically playing 73 of the same 75, and it's just like, who's got it?
Man, you should have been on Grinding Breach at the RC. You'd have been hog heaven.
Well, that might be a little bit different. I feel like I wouldn't mind taking the draw in the Delver Mirror in some scenarios, but I've also just been conditioned to take the draw, so whatever.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, let me hop into my history of Legacy. It's a little shorter, so I'll try and keep it brief. But I'd started over COVID, and I started with Standard online. Got my buddy Travis Weeks into it as well. Then we bought into Modern after we made one of our best friends, Joel Alexander. We met him and over COVID, and he taught us Modern and showed us like Death and Taxes and Scape Shift and all sorts of different decks that he was playing at the time. So we bought into Modern. Basically bought like the whole format because it wasn't egregiously expensive over COVID. Cards like took a massive dive, which is where I like ended up collecting a lot of the lion's share of my collection. Because like I remember it, Snapcaster Mages were like $15, Stoneforge Mystics were like $10, and it was just like no one was playing, so I used that as an opportunity to sort of establish my pillars of Modern. And then I don't remember exactly what happened. Oh, wait, no, actually I do. I was at the game store playing Modern with Nathan of the Guild Leaf, Nathan Goldberg. And one of our friends, Michael Warm, he had brought over a battle box full of all these Legacy decks. And Michael has a super deep Legacy collection. He brought like 6 full decks, no proxies at all. Just like, what do you want to play? Let's just sit down. And I've had these Legacy decks just sitting here rotting, and I want to dust them off. I'm like, cool, man, teach me some Legacy. So learned like Reanimator that day, lands, dredge, just basically played like, I think I went 1-0 drop from our Modern local to just sit there and play Legacy with Michael for like 5 or 6 hours. It was an absolute blast. So I went home and did some research, and I figured, I was like, for the money, the cards that I already have and the money that I'm willing to spend, how can I make the most Legacy decks possible with the least amount of money, basically? So what I ended up doing was I bought one Underground Sea, which was actually opened in front of me at Dice City Games in Maryland, and I paid a very pretty penny for it. But I ended up buying that Underground Sea so I could make Death Shadow and Ninjas. Those were 2 decks that I started Legacy with, and 2 pretty solid decks to start with. I think both have a lot of layers to it. Both are effectively tempo decks. I mean, Death Shadow at the time was definitely a tempo deck. Ninjas was sort of your AB combo tempo deck, if that's what you want to call it, where you sort of have to establish the right cards to do the thing. And I started playing Legacy. I started actually doing pretty well at our locals. And the one in particular that I went to a lot was Curio Cavern, which allowed proxies. So every now and again, I would show up with a couple proxy decks. And I eventually came across the Epic Storm, like the actual channel itself. And I really fell in love with the gameplay of the deck, because my thought process was, if my opponent can't play the game, I'm going to win, right? And like, I answered that question for myself and started picking up the pieces. And, lo and behold, over COVID, I ended up finding a deal for like 24 dual lands, and it was like 5 Gs flat, like taxes, fees, everything came out to 5 Gs. So it was like 200-ish bucks per dual land. I'm like, yeah, whatever. I just got like a big commission check. Let me pull the trigger on this. So I built the Epic Storm. I also built Bant Control with Uro, and I started working on building Delver. So I just had all these decks sort of laying around, and I really just attached myself to Storm and played that deck for, the better part of like 2.5 years, and really got good at it. I took it to a couple 2Ks, 5Ks, etc. Beat a lot of really good players with it. So like that was a really cool experience. I don't think I'm beating like folks like Bob Huang with a deck that's fair. So I'm happy to be on the unfair deck, and being able to just play through Force of Wills with Veil of Summers and stuff, and ended up becoming a site writer for the website. Worked with Bryant, Alex McKinley, and Jordan Kareem. They helped level me up a lot as a player. And then I sort of got tired of Storm right around the White Plume Adventure era, when every like half the meta was playing Thalia, Archon of Emeria, and Chalice, and Chancellor of the NX, and I was just like, man, screw this. So pivoted on to 8 cast and then found Delver after Eternal Weekend. So from there, played Delver for like a year. Then I made an investment into some Gaia's Cradles, basically right before Bowmaster got printed. So not like the best idea on my part, but sort of worked out in my favor because I started playing Cradle Control, and then that also led me to being able to have everything I needed for decks like Nadu Gaia's Cradle and basically all the other different forms of Delver if I wanted to switch it up. So now I have like a really robust collection to where I can play just about any deck in Legacy minus like certain stompy decks and then like the lands decks. But I know for a fact I don't really have interest in playing either because one, I don't really want to spend the money on a full play set of City of Traders. 2, I don't think those decks are very fun or interesting. 3, I don't want to buy 3 more Mox Diamonds and a Tabernacle. And I also don't find making Merit Lage very interesting. But everything else in the format I can build. I really enjoy it. I do love to cantrip. I love to make really cool plays and do things that are a bit out of the box. So that's really where I'm at today with Legacy.
That's one of the things I always like talking to you because you and I came at the format from totally different angles and kind of ended up in the same spot. I have always just come to the conclusion that the 2 best cards to play are Force of Will and Wasteland. Like to me, like I've played, like everyone always thinks, oh, he's a Delver player, but like I only played Delver because it was the best Force of Will and Wasteland deck. And you know, when it was Reanimator, I played Reanimator, and I played Death Shadow, and I've played all kinds of different decks. I just think that those 2 cards basically answer any possible card, right? Because Force of Will counters any spell, and Wasteland kills any land. So that basically covers the entirety of spectrums that your opponent can do. And neither of them cost any mana, basically. They're both free. So I have basically played Force of Will and Wasteland in every deck that I've played for the last 13 years or 14 years or however long I've been playing Legacy. And I just put all the other cards around them. Now, that typically involves Brainstorm, obviously, Ponder, Daze, right? Those cards are typically cards that I also play, but I always want to play Force of Will and I always want to play Wasteland, and that's been my ethos for Legacy since I started playing, and I think it served me really well. And what I think that allows Legacy that it doesn't allow any other format is it allows for the least number of non-games. So if you compare it to Modern, for example, I feel like there are a bunch of Modern games that you play that like are good, but there's, you know, some percentage of games that are simply non-games because either your deck or your opponent's deck fails to function, which I believe happens less in Legacy than any other format because of the power of the cantrips. Or 2, your opponent simply like explodes and you are unable to interact with them and they just murder you, right? Because you don't have any way to interact with them. So to me, the beauty of Legacy has always been that like the answers are typically better than the threats, you know, which is very different than any of the other formats. So to me, that's always kind of been the place to be, like make your deck as consistent as possible, have the widest breadth of answers for anything that your opponent can have, and then you can figure out kind of how to win after that. So that's how I've always played Legacy.
Yeah, and I think that mindset is really good if you want to be able to basically buy into one deck, invest your time into this strategy, get really good at it. You know, one deck's not fair to Force Will and Wasteland because those cards are in multiple different decks, but it also creates sort of this like sub-breed of the meta of decks like Cradle Control and Cloud Post and Red Stompy that prey on like Force of Will, Wasteland style decks. So it creates this like rock, paper, scissors effect where everything can, like anything can beat anything in Legacy, but you do create this like very wide matchup dichotomy when it's like, how are you planning on beating 4 Endurance, Atraxa, Scythecat Cub, like all these creatures that you can't bolt, and then they also interact at instant speed. Like the Delver decks aren't prepared to do that. So the best Delver players in the world are the ones that can figure out where the Force of Will matters the most and the Wasteland matters the most, so they can maximize their win percentages in an otherwise largely unfavorable matchup.
Yeah, 100%.
And you don't get that without doing it over and over and over again for years.
I think the actual hardest part of playing Delver is, or any blue, fair, or tempo strategy is not casting your spells. Like, all your spells cost 1 or 0, so you can literally blow your entire hand the first couple of turns of the game, but the art of it is understanding that you can let all the stuff that your opponent wants to resolve because you can still beat it, and then save force of will for the very last thing that you really can't beat. And that is the thing that I work on all the time. I really needed to kind of learn to like let that stuff resolve and just believe in the top of the deck that I would find a way to answer it and I could hold the force of will in my hand. And the more I do that, typically the better of a player I become.
Agreed. Yeah, I mean, I can't really speak to that too much. It kind of reminds me of that old brainstorm article talking about brainstorming in like 10,000 words or whatever it was. Something to reference there. So.
Well, so okay, two things on that because I think that's an interesting topic. The adage used to be that you used to basically hold your brainstorm for as long as possible because if you looked at Legacy 10 years ago, it was a lot of very small incremental advantage, and it was before the fire design of like one card engines. Think of Fable the Mirror Breaker, right? Like cards like that simply didn't exist at the time. So the old adage was that you held your brainstorm as long as possible, and then you only casted it when you could really convert the 2 dead cards into your hand into live cards. That was the only way to do that. That ethos fundamentally changed around 2019 or 2020, and Javier Dominguez wrote an article right about that time how the nature of cantrips has fundamentally changed because you need to cast them early and often to find your threats that gain incremental advantage every turn, over turn cycles, or simply win the game on their own to get them on the battlefield faster than your opponents have. So like that entire like thought process about like what cantrips in Legacy are supposed to look like and when you're supposed to cast them and how often you're supposed to cast them changed dramatically after the fire design era of 19 and 20. That I mean, a lot of that still continues to today, and then has now an entire separate layer on top of it if you're playing in any Bowmaster mirrors and stuff. So I think if you took a player that was an amazing Legacy player in 2015 who hadn't played at all in 10 years and dropped them at Eternal Weekend, that their heuristics would actually be fundamentally wrong because the nature of Legacy as a format has changed in those 10 years.
Yeah, agreed. And it's hard for me to give too much perspective on what 10 years ago was, but I think that's the beauty of sort of the teamwork that we've developed, is that you have a really large wealth of knowledge and really powerful heuristics that you've learned over reading multiple articles, observing different players. And me, I kind of have like brute force and ignorance still in a way where like, I would still call myself like wet behind the ears and willing to just basically do anything to win from a Legacy perspective and get creative in areas that maybe your heuristics don't allow you to sometimes. So we can have these more robust conversations about the changing of brainstorm and what tech matters most, or etc. I mean, we've had damn near a million conversations at this point about us playing the same deck down to like almost the same 75, and we have completely different opinions and thoughts on what should be done in certain scenarios when we sort of freeze frame the game. And so I thoroughly appreciate that part of our teamwork here.
Yeah, so for anybody that's listening that wants to read the article is called Casting Cantrips in 2020. It's by Javier, and it's posted on the Haruruya website. So if you haven't read it, I recommend it. The stuff that he wrote there is still the same today. And when I read this, it like blew my mind because like it fundamentally changed how I looked at casting Brainstorm. And you could do worse than following Javier's advice. Let's put it that way.
No doubt. I also think that that's a pretty good spot here for us to wrap up. Unless, Lee, did you have anything else you wanted to chat about?
Nope. This was a good episode, man.
Cool. All right, y'all. Well, next episode, we'll look to talk more about the history of Delver specifically, and we'll come up with an additional robust agenda. I kind of want to keep it more Legacy focused, too, from here on out. I think we can put Standard to bed now that we're transitioning into Modern season. And as per usual, if you noticed anything or have any recommendations for us, please let us know. Also, if there's any agenda items that you want to hear, please also let us know. We want to put out the content that you guys want to hear. So, yeah, holler at us.
All right. Thanks for listening. Cheers.
Cheers.